with that, I'd like to take a few minutes to just not only thank, but also introduce our speaker. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Dave Schrader. Dr. Schrader has worked and is also on the board for Teradata, which is a technology company that works with data analytics, working in not only with sports, but also working with businesses as well. Dr. Dave has worked with a number of colleges and universities, over 30 colleges and universities across the country, working again in sports and also in business. Dr. Dave is a proud alumni of Purdue University. He's a proud Boilermaker. We've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of days talking about how wonderful the season was last year for the Boilermakers, not only on the football side of things, but also on basketball. So I think you will enjoy his conversation and what he's planning on sharing with you. He has a unique perspective and really is looking forward to not only having some interaction, but hearing some of the issues or challenges that some of you all are facing, but also creating a learning environment to learn a lot about how people are using data. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Dave Schrader.
Okay. Thank you, Troy. Thank you for being here. I'll give you a little bit more on my background. So I'm retired 5 years from Teradata as of last month. What do you do when you retire? Well, I went on a trip to Machu Picchu. I went on a sailing trip to Tonga. I turned on the TV, and after 3 Jerry Springer episodes, I decided there was going to be more to life. So I continued to help on the Teradata University Network, which is the outreach effort from the company. It's totally free for people to take a look at it. It's used in a lot of business school organizations to enrich the faculty experience and the student experience. And I wrote a lot of case studies, about 300 of them, of what proficient users of databases are all about. I got to travel worldwide. I have 1.5 million frequent flyer miles left over from all the travel, so I've been going on lots and lots of trips. But when I'm not doing vacations, I roam around the country, actually even Germany, giving talks at universities, which I call a Moneyball day on campus, and I'll explain what that means as we go. I've done, in 3 years, 104 talks at 52 schools. So I usually batch up multiple schools on one trip. In December, for example, I went to Mississippi State, and you'll see Peyton Phillips in a couple seconds, and then Alabama, and then Auburn, and then Kennesaw State. So 4 schools in 1 week. And I'll make the offer at the end, but also now at the beginning. If you like what you see, you want to use me to help educate your athletic department on state of the art, I'm happy to come on campus and help do that. It's kind of a pay forward thing. I want kids to take more math, computer science, stats, econ classes so that they get really good jobs. If I can use sports as a trick to get them to study those topics, even though they're going to be learning the very same technologies of Tableau visualization, SQL Server, Teradata database, SAS stats packages, so much the better. Okay? So we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to give you the 3 top topics that I think are going to be useful takeaways. The first one will be, I know that you're very focused on the administration analytics, is what I would call IPP and other tools. I'm going to give you a picture of how I think about all the opportunity areas where analytics could be used. There are going to be 6 of them. Then I'm going to tell you about 4 Moneyball projects that I managed to make happen. This is about half of the ones that we've done. But it will show you what kids in the business school or computer science can do for your athletic department or conference. And then Troy wanted me to give you some tips. So I have some interesting tips at the end of how to change your culture, how to get going. And most of that is based on my experience looking at a lot of companies, some of which were behind the leaders, and how did they accelerate their progress. And I think those tips will apply to you. So let's start with the 6 areas. At the school level, you have the administration analytics. I'm going to spend 0 time on that because you have a lot of other speakers that have covered that. In the front office, you have the area of fans and donors. I'm going to give you an example project there. And then I put roster construction and recruiting there. For the pros, that's a front office function because of the finances, salary caps. You have scholarship limits. In some cases, that's not to ignore the scouting information. The coaches are definitely involved too, but I just put it up there so it's a nice grid. In the back office, the sexy area would be team tactics. So what's the next play coming, say in football? What kind of pick and roll should you use in basketball? That area is going to advance at a very healthy rate because of the use of sensors. And sensors are becoming quite commonly used in the pros, and the colleges are mostly behind, and there'll be an interesting discussion on how to make that, and more specifically, who owns the data. Health and safety, so concussion, analytics, again, more monitoring for sleep, and integrating the data is a topic that I'm not going to cover very much. There'll be one slide there. And then I hadn't thought about it until I was skiing one day and bumped into someone who took me over to the Mountain West conference, and within an hour I had 8 project ideas for students to do. So I'm going to put league analytics to complement the school level analytics, right? So those, to my mind, are the 6 areas. Now I left out one area that's going to be big, which will be wagering analytics, betting analytics, but I don't get into that, but another person in the audience sitting over there seems to like to work in that area, so I'll vector questions to him. We're going to talk about, on that picture, a fan piece of work for the Mountain West Conference that was done with the help of Notre Dame and Air Force Academy cadets. I love the small schools. Why? The small schools will give you all their data. Within one day, I had full access at the University of Dubuque to their Huddle system. And then we did another project. Huddle was for football. Then we did wrestling, and I have full access to the Front Rush tool, if you know about that. So I log in and take a look at how recruiting is going. We'll talk about that. Team tactics was University of Dubuque data, and we didn't have any students to work on it that were proficient. So I used Oklahoma State students that I found. So how cool is that to have a D1 school helping a D3 school on opponent analytics? And then we'll talk about the NCAA's wrestling tournaments for Division III. And I actually had 5 schools participate in that project, and we had a little contest for who could come up with the best regional tournament design. So that's the preview of what's coming here in terms of what you can do with undergraduate and graduate level students. Okay, ready to jump in? Everybody good? So when I drill into the fan area, it is to drive revenues by having strong linkages with fans. And this is a very easy area for the business school faculty and students to work on because it's primarily, like the previous speaker said, customer relationship management. So you want to know who your fans are. Increasingly with digital data, you can get more information than demographics. You can look at psychographics, how do they behave. You can do the usual acquisition, growth, and retention campaigns. You can do marketing mix on what channels do people pay attention to. You can do, increasingly at the high-powered schools, more dynamic and certainly variable pricing. And then I think you should be doing lifetime value calculations, and I'll touch on that in just a little bit. So let's drill into a typical project. So I was happily skiing in Breckenridge. I used to live in Colorado Springs. A friend of mine with me said, hey, what are you doing on Tuesday? Do you want to go over and talk to the Mountain West Conference commissioners? And before I knew it, I was talking to Dan Butterly, who runs basketball, and Jamie Hickson, who runs football commissioner. And I did a little bit of research, and one interesting thing that I found, if you look at the right here, is the huge discrepancy in the average attendance for basketball games. So somebody's here from New Mexico, right? Who's that? Yeah, you're doing a great job. You're top of the heap with 13,000 people for a typical game. And do we have anybody from Air Force Academy here? They're kind of at the bottom. Now, granted, the arena is old, but when you think about the population dynamics of Albuquerque and Colorado Springs, they aren't that much different. You have all these retired military people in Colorado Springs, so I'm astounded that that number is that bad. So I thought, well, maybe a good student project would be to dig in on why Why is it, and what are the drivers of people going to the games? However, Jamie, the football guy, had a project in mind after he heard what we could do, and he kind of gently got Dan out of the room. And then we had to sign a non-disclosure for half of it, so I can tell you about the other half. And I needed students, so I immediately picked up the phone and I called that person over there, Scott Nestler, identify yourself, from Notre Dame. And I said, Scott, you're teaching a sports analytics class. Do you want to have your kids work on a project? And it took all of, 3 days? And we had 2 teams of 3, undergraduate team, MBA team. I was rooting for the undergraduate team to outdo the graduate team, but the graduate team did better. But one of the first things that they came back with was the students went, looked conference by conference for football at average attendance over a period of time. And you can see, I don't know that you can read it, but at 0% at the top, and the SEC conference schools were just holding static. Now, maybe they always sell out. But the other schools, some of them, including the American Conference, were down here losing an average of 3% of their fan base every year. So it's decreasing, and since it's a revenue sport, the problem is acute. You better understand your fans, and you better understand what drives them to come to games. So they gave us data, and the data looked like this from the Mountain West Conference. So on line item in an Excel spreadsheet on Saturday in November, Colorado State's coming to town. Their record's 5-4. Air Force is 6-3. Kick time's going to be 8:15. I think it's because it was on TV. It got pushed back from the preferred time of noon. And you can see the attendance, and they also had the weather captured. Make sense? That's the raw data. We gave it to the Notre Dame students, and within a week or so, they came back with a variety of derived fields. So does momentum matter? Right? If you've won your last few games, they created a new field for that. Do extreme weather conditions matter? Was it snowing that day? Is that going to impact single game sales? What's the start time? What's the wind differential? What day of the week? It goes on and on and on. And then they could run some studies to pick out collectively for all of the Mountain West Conference teams what matters and what doesn't. And we had some nice charts, and we gave it to Jamie, who did the readout to the athletic directors. And what happens with any business intelligence project that's any good? You do the readout, and then they have more questions. So in this case, we gave them the results, and then more questions was, this looks good. Can you do a model for every single school? Because the factors differ school by school. So for example, if you think about it, Air Force Academy, Wyoming, New Mexico, all in November are pretty cold, where Hawaii, San Diego State, weather is unlikely to be as big a factor. So you actually can run the tools, and you can pick out what the factors are. So they said, the Notre Dame kids were great. Can they continue working on this? And I said, no, Scott's class is over. We're starting the spring term. But I will pick up the phone and call 3 schools where I've been on campus, no faculty, and have given talks. So I called up UNLV, Colorado State, and the Air Force Academy. It took 1 hour before I got a return call from 2 colonel types at the Air Force Academy that said, we want to sign up to do your project. And I said, okay, it's going to be a lot of work. Like, how many students do you have and for how long? And they said, you can have the whole class of 24 cadets. It'll be their side project for the class. So we had 24 cadets sign up, went there and briefed them. They came back with some of these models that indicate for this particular school, time of kickoff was mildly important. Interestingly, playing a ranked opponent at home gave them 7,500 more tickets, and playing a conference game dropped them by 11,000 on attendance. Now, why was that? It happened that they had a pretty weak set of visitors, weak people in the conference. So every school differed a little bit. Non-Saturday games were not a good idea across the board, as I recall. Anybody from the Mid-America Conference here? Because they moved to, I don't know what that's going to do to your downstream donor pool when the kids don't go to the games, but I would think that would be an interesting project to look at too. Okay. Start times were interesting. The cadets came back and said, well, the optimal start time across the board would seem to be for this school 4 o'clock instead of what you're doing today. And some schools always kick at the same time. Other schools vary it by the weather. Best case would be UNLV. You do not want to play a day game in August, right? And the rest of the year it gets better. Okay? Any questions? That's the fan thing. Am I going too fast? Or this style is good? Okay? A project that I am just now starting, and I'm looking for people that want to be in on it, is I talked to UCLA and Purdue donor side people, and I want to know what's the difference between people that donate to the athletic department compared to academics. And I've done the literature search, but we need to start digging into all the different factors, which are on the right. Private and public schools are quite different in donor amounts by about a factor of 3. You know, distance to going to the games can be important. I found some stuff on avoidance behavior. So what channels do people like to be contacted on and which ones do they hate? So you get hung up on, stuff like that. There are a variety of areas that students could look at. So if you're interested in that project, let me know. Okay, let's move on to what is my current area of interest, which would be recruiting. And just to provoke this, if you looked in IPP, which we just did, what do you have in there on recruiting? Anybody know? The dollar amount being spent on recruiting by sport. I think a more interesting question is to ask how much time by the coaches and dollars are spent totally on recruiting, and do that sport by sport. I asked 3 coaches across different sports, when you look at the entire year, how much time are you coaching compared to recruiting? And the answer was pretty much 30% coaching, 70%. So this looks like an opportunity for a big time savings if we can do a better job of using analytics to increase the precision, meaning you get more of the kids that you're spending your time on and turn off time spent on the kids that you're not going to be able to get. And then you can also save on travel. Make sense? So I launched a project in the fall at the University of Dubuque with the wrestling coach, John McGovern. John's one of my favorite people because we've done 2 projects, and here's a math student named Troy. So we had bi-weekly meetings. And if you think about this problem, we have full access to the coach, so I can ask him, what are your criteria for recruiting? And typically he will go after kids who placed in the state tournament last year, 1st through 8th, in states that are near University of Dubuque. So you can drive there from Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa. Or he recruits nationwide from California, Texas, and Florida. And the reason for that is because a lot of those state schools cut back their wrestling programs, so there's not as much in-state competition. For him, this is brutal because Division III wrestling is Iowa, right? So Iowa and Iowa State are going to be all over the top recruits, so he has to compete pretty aggressively. So wrestling skills, or we call it accolades, are top criteria. Then weight class, he needed 133 and 174 pounders, so we're going to give them higher credit. Also, he's the head of the Christian Athlete Association for all the people on campus, so he wants people of good character, no drug dealer types out of Chicago. And he wanted to know if we could automate the analysis of that, and we'll get back to that in a second. Now, as we dug into it, Troy and I had these discussions, and I made the observation, this is really a dating game problem. This is a matchmaking problem that got mentioned in one of the earlier things. We know what the coach is looking for and who he wants, but we don't know what the students are looking for. It'd be nice to know their decision matrix and which factors are important. So as a proxy for the recruits, we did an online poll that Troy developed to come up with questions of how important was this factor, that factor, other factors, and then we would apply that. So for example, how far it is from campus, is that an important factor for you? Answer. It's a completely bimodal distribution. There are some kids who want to be near mom and dad, and then there are a bunch of kids who want to be about as far away from mom and dad as they possibly can get. All right? Do they offer the major? They offer an aviation major, which makes them a bit unique compared to some of the other schools. So things like that. On the character side, John said, I like kids that want to go into the military or be police officers. They're usually very disciplined, and that's a good marker for what I might want. So if you can gather the data on either side, and this is a database-y kind of thing, but you do a logical data model of what are all the fields that we could gather information about on an athlete. So on the character, does the application talk about going to church? Proximity, location, high school recommendations, GPA, academics, any alumni in the family, what's the wrestling history this season, last season, and then what's the student collection of criteria, including making a campus visit. We can gather all that stuff. Luke, where's Luke? I was at University of Iowa last year talking to a PhD student who actually captured the Twitter activity after a kid made a campus visit. She's now up to 75% accurate if the kid has 8 or more offers. Looking at the Twitter feed, did the kid use the Go Hawkeyes? Did the kid follow the coach? Did the coach and the athletes follow the kid? You can create a predictive model based on the social media things plus the regular things that radically improves your predictive capability. Is that valuable to the coaches? Absolutely. If you know at 75% confidence you're getting a kid, then you push that kid over the brink, but you don't work on the kids where they're going to go to Nebraska with 80% confidence. So very valuable what you can get. So when you put these together, you can weight the coaches area, and then you can take the student area, and the top factor, and we're guessing here, you have to validate the model over a period of years, but if the coach is communicating and the kid's not responding, then that's probably a negative marker. On the other hand, a kid who instantly opens every email and opens it 4 times, that kid's probably pretty interested in your school. The cost factor for D3, proximity to campus, offering the major, and the ability to start where there are factors that we were looking at. Make sense? Now, you have to weight them, and this was a learning experience because we got the results for the state championships from a lot of these schools in the spring, and I was looking at California and Florida, and I realized we had like a 10-point scale for driving time, but the kids in California aren't going to drive to Iowa to go to school. They're going to fly, which means we have to weight the family income rating off of the zip code at a higher rate, right? And proximity driving time at a lesser rate. Okay? So if you have a 1 to 10-point scale for how interested is the coach in the kid, and how interested is the kid in the coach, you can then use Tableau to draw this kind of a picture where the coach is very interested in these kids, and the higher you go, the more interested the kids are in Dubuque. So the top matches are in the upper right, and then we can provide feedback to the coach on kids that are very interested in you and you haven't been that interested in them, or vice versa. The color coding is the weight class. The coach can hover over anything and pull up all the information about that kid. So that's what we've been doing on recruiting. I have a lot more ideas for other things that we could do, but hopefully that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
On that map, is the size of the circle, what does that mean?
I think it was number of communications that we had, more being better. So if the kid's interacting on a frequent or recent basis, so you can weight these things. So I mean, this is not rocket science, right? We just had our meetings every week. The math student did a good job of learning what he needed to do as a capstone class, and I provided a little bit of commentary here and there. The coach was crazy about it, absolutely. So worked out well. Let's talk about team tactics. This is one of the first projects. When I was in campus there, Mike Durnan, the defensive coordinator, came up to me and he said, I'm all in on analytics. I would love to do a project. I'll give you all my data. I have ideas about what we can do. Let's go. And I said, okay, but I don't have any connections here with students, but I do at Oklahoma State. So within a couple days, just like at Notre Dame, I had 2 teams of 2 students. The winning team is this pair. Peter is now a faculty member at LSU. Peter's from China. Peter doesn't even know the rules of football, but actually that's an okay thing because Jake was a high school linebacker. And so between the 2 of them, they had all the skills to do the modeling. I will say it was entertaining to watch this group in action because I would give them something on Friday that would be due like the following Wednesday. Usually it was all done by Monday morning, and they wanted to know what more they could work on. I had to ask them, are you still going to your classes? Are you still going to get your MBA from Oklahoma State on time? But it's a litmus test and proof to the idea that sports is very addicting, and these students get really excited about applying the technology. Okay, do you guys know Huddle? I'll just tell you a little bit if you don't. Huddle is a game cut-up kind of system. You put the video online, and then you annotate it, in their case, manually. You get a sideline view. Dubuque is in blue and white. You get the end zone view, and the coaches annotate this. So we took 1 year's worth of data, and basically it goes across the top, but I also wrote it on the left. So this is play 21 in the game. Dubuque, we're only looking at Dubuque playing defense, so they're in blue and white. You know where the hash is. You know what the down and distance was. You know the outcome. This was a pass completed for a gain of 3. You code up the offensive formations and people in motion. And basically you get an Excel spreadsheet that's 45 columns wide with all the data. So Peter didn't need to even look at the game film. He just needed the raw data. All right? Now, what can you do with that? I've said, let's start with something small. Let's just predict whether the next play is going to be a run or a pass, right? And see how long it takes to do that work. So they created what's called a cascaded decision tree. It's pretty simple. What you do, like any good science experiment, is you take 20% of the data randomly and you put it off to the side. You take the remaining 80% and you train a model. Then you test the model by dropping it in and seeing if it predicts. In this model, left would be it's going to be a run, and right would be it's going to be a pass. So let's see if this works. There it is. Whoops. Can't see that it's showing up. Anyway, on the very top, it says all you have to do, the first factor, is look at the offensive personnel setup. If it looks like a run, because they've got running backs, right, it's going to be a run. And stop. If it doesn't look like a run, then you have to ask what down is it. First or second, you go over here. Third or fourth, you go over here. If it's first or second down, you have to ask what the score difference is in the game. And if it's a blowout game, you're going to go over here. Down in distance, or distance to the first yard, 4.5 or greater than 4.5 is the split factor at that next level. Okay, so this is nice because you can explain it to the coach, and it's not earth-shattering, like he didn't already kind of by intuition know that. But it took them 1 week, and when we took the test data and put it in, it was 75% accurate. And the students were all apologetic. They wanted to work on it more. And I said, no, I want you to move on and work on one other area. There's a good reason why I didn't want them to work on it anymore. Can anybody guess the reason? I told you it took 1 year's worth of data. It's a bunch of different teams with different coaching styles. It would be better to pick their arch rival Wartburg, who they always lose to. They always go 8-2, and they always lose to Wartburg, and take 6 years of data just on Wartburg, who's got the same coach every year, and then we're looking at one offensive style, and we can go deep. So stay tuned for the Beat Wartburg project. Okay? Coming soon. What I want them to move on to is this. Do any of you know what Sankey diagrams are? Teradata worked on these first for Wells Fargo to identify fraud. And what you do is you take a bunch of events and you line them up in order by time. And then the outcome is always on this side, which would be a fraudulent check or fraudulent opening of a bank account or stealing somebody's credit card. And then you back up in time and you see what did they do before that. So I wanted to apply this to football. And Coach Durnan's top area was we usually lose if and only if we give up too many explosive plays. And I said, what's an explosive play? And he said, a 12 or more yard run or a 16 or more yard pass. So when you drop that into the system and screen for it, out of the 600 whatever plays, there were 82 where they gave up a big explosive play. So over here, whoops, the original version of this would be I want whether it was an explosive play or not, and I'm just going to look in the next slide on the yes, the green ones, and you just click on it. And then I want to know what defense did Dubuque have? I don't even know what these are, COV, robber, whatever. We don't need to know. And what offensive formation were they up against? And the width of the arcs indicates how many times that happened. So if I clicked over here on the green part, the explosive yes, then I would be able to see, okay, this is the defense that they're failing to cover well. And here's the offensive formations that work well against Dubuque's defense and give up the big play. Make sense? I showed this to the coach and I said, give me human factors feedback. Is it too difficult to understand? Would the students understand it? He goes, I get it. Students get it. Can I show it to the Green Bay Packers guy that I know? And I said, absolutely. And the kids got an A for the project. So it's an example in tactics. Okay, I'm going to skip health and safety. Let's talk about league analytics. So the same guy I talked about, John McGovern, the wrestling coach, this was our first project with him. He's a very gentle, quiet guy. He's killer on the mat, I'm sure, and he was a like 4-time All-American NCAA guy and has been involved. But he came up to me and basically he goes like this. He goes, Dr. Dave, like, can you help me with a project? I think you could do math on a project for me. And I said, well, what's the problem? He goes, well, it's not really a wrestling problem. It's a tournament design problem. And I'm head right now of the Wrestling Coaching Association for 105 schools. And they're all unhappy because the wrestling committee for Division III has, he didn't use the word gerrymandered, I'll use it. So if you're in the West region, you would expect 105 divided by 6 regions, about 17 per region. There were only 10 in the West. And there were 21 in the New England area. The New England coaches weren't exactly real happy with that state of affairs because they all advanced 3 guys per 10 weight classes, right? So we decided we would do a little project. And I said, I could do the project for you, but I'm not going to do the project. I'm just going to pitch it the next few places when I'm on the road, and we'll see what happens. So here's how it went. We did a survey right away. Here's some of the survey results on what the coaches thought. And if you subpoena me, I'll give you the unredacted version, but unlikely to happen. So here's the problem. It's a really simple problem to explain to people. So you got 105 schools. Most of them are in the northeastern quadrant from Iowa to New England. There are a couple of outliers. But basically what we need is an algorithm that will take these schools, think of them as dots on a map, and clump them together. And the criteria are, once you do the clumping, every one of those regions should have roughly the same number of schools in it. We need a power model because we don't want to put all the powerhouses in one region. So we got to have some number that would rank them on power, like on a 100-point scale. And when you added up all the ones that you put in one region, you try to equalize that out. Oh, and by the way, Division III has no budget for travel, so we got to minimize the driving time distance, typically. These schools in Virginia are not going to get placed in an Iowa region. So that's the problem. And obviously the first factor, number of teams, and the distance, we can do latitude and longitude, but I didn't have a power rating, but I totally lucked out because the next talk I was giving where I pitched this was at University of Cincinnati, where a guy came out of the audience, a big guy, said, I wrestled heavyweight for Iowa State. I will do the power model for you. I can fit some curves on the results from the last few national championships. And so now we had all the information that we needed. And as I went around the country, 4 schools signed up to work on it. So the head of the math department at Bentley wanted to try it. And the interesting part from a research perspective is they all wanted to use slightly different algorithms. So he wanted to do a genetic algorithm. I'll talk about that in a second. Scott back there from Notre Dame thought it was a binary integer problem with a set partitioning angle. Matt and Amir at Purdue and Wright State both thought of it as 2-stage clustering kind of problems. So they went at it. They got students to help them, or they did the work. And we kind of had a contest. Who do you think won? Scott? Sorry, Scott. Nope. The Bentley guy. So what Nathan did was just to do it like mutations. So you sprinkle them and you create like a strand of 17, and then you can swap. You can mutate the strands, and you just iterate on that, and you just keep measuring, is it better or is it worse? It's like going to the eye doctor. Is it better or is it worse? And you keep doing that 20,000 times, which takes 15 minutes, and then you have the answer. And then you can put it on a Tableau visual. So that's what we did. I did my first trip to the NCAA back here to meet with JP, who's the commissioner for wrestling. And I walked him through the project, and he thought it was very cool. And I met with him yesterday. And they're going to try it out next year when they have to do the regionalization. Is that cool? Results get actually used by kids. And then there were some papers that are in flux, and it all worked out well. Okay? We're doing perfect. Any questions on the projects? That's just 4 of them. But I'm a very practical Midwestern kind of person, so it's like let's have kids do projects that look good on their resumes, right? And I can guarantee you, since I was a recruiter for software engineers, I ran a group of 50 people. It's like they all look alike coming out of school, but if you have projects that are interesting, you zero in on that right away. So here were some of Troy's questions. I thought, I'll just ask a few people. I have opinions, but I'll ask a few people of, why don't more people do more analytics? And what does it take? What are the impediments? And why should it be an imperative? And when you go home, maybe, can you take these slides and can you go have a little chat with people and show them the possibilities? That would be my dream coming out of this talk. So one person that I love talking to is Peyton Phillips at Mississippi State. If you do nothing else from this talk, you should go look at Peyton's LinkedIn page where he tells you what he did with ticketing, which is pretty amazing. And if you don't know about the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, you should go there at least once in your lifetime. That's where people that love this stuff hang out. But he was a presenter on ticketing and what he did to do dynamic pricing at Mississippi State. And if you listen to that talk, you will hear things like price elasticity for all the different sections of the stadium, win elasticity. So he knows to what extent, if they have a winning or a losing season, what's that going to do to subsequent season tickets. He is really big on surveying people at the end, and they back correlate it to where they sat in the stadium. And they do personalized feedback, and they measure, previous speaker talked about net promoter scores and positive and negative reactions. And they have gotten astronomically better over a period of time just by doing the personalized feedback. So you could learn a lot by going to that particular thing. He has the title of Director of Analytics within the athletic department. That's pretty rare. I think Nebraska was the first school to do that. And it might not be a bad idea. So that's my tip 1, hire a Director of Analytics so that you have some focus for collecting, massaging, analyzing, and promoting the use of data within the department. Okay? Now, I said, okay, now, how do you deal with the athletic director? How do you explain what analytics is all about? And Peyton's next tip is watch your language and solve real problems. He said, when you say analytics, most athletic directors hear the word voodoo. They don't know anything about it. They're a little scared of it. Don't even use that word. Call it business strategy. Don't call your people analysts. Call them business consultants. Next. Never ever use the word regression or machine learning or any of that stuff. What you have to do is just recast everything into the problem statement. So call it butts in seats. We have a butts in seats project, right? And that will be our fan modeling project. Or what new people should the donor group approach? Or in the case of recruiting, like I just told you, we can decrease the amount of time coaches are spending on recruiting and give them more time for coaching. Those are all projects. The other comment was make the life of everybody easier. Do the Excel macros that they need so they can self-generate their reports. Just treat yourself like a service group. And he's in the midst of rebranding his group because of vocabulary. wasn't working. So that's tip 2 is do real little projects. Little projects, I think, is the next slide, so that you get sustained success, but watch your language. Walk before you run. So to help schools get going on this, what I've done for some of the projects, I have a list of 12 projects that I'm kind of focusing on. And where we've already done them, I'm writing them up as templates because I think every school should be doing fan analytics, for example. Maybe you already are. But if you want that template, I can give it to you. Or it's really written for students to pick it up and then go to the athletic department and say, I want to do a capstone class, and here's what I ought to be able to do for you. Here's what kids at other schools have done for their people, and get something going with the athletic department. As I mentioned, the donor stuff, the recruiting pipeline, are all things that you come up with. John liked some work we did on how you stack up in your conference on recruiting. So we showed him versus the other teams in his conference and then the other big state schools where people recruiting on maps. Those were pretty easy. I would love to do more back office projects that really requires help from coaches. So that's tip 3. Tip 4. If you do not have a sports analytics club on campus, form one. If the athletic department formed the club, it would be really special because most of these clubs are done by students in the MBA programs that are knocking on the door of athletics and no one is opening the door and giving them any data. So I've given talks a couple weeks ago at Berkeley. Arkansas had 60 kids at their sports analytics club. Notre Dame, you want to talk, Scott? I said I'd give you a minute or so.
Sure. We started the club 3 years ago when a few students came to me and said, we'd like to start a sports analytics club. Will you be our advisor? I said, sure. We started doing work for one team, football. The second year, we added baseball and ice hockey. The third year, we added volleyball, women's basketball, and men's soccer. I have 150 or 200 students in the club who come to guest speakers and things like that, but there's really 30 or 40 that are actually active in doing analytics projects for teams. Much of the other tips apply. Be careful what language you use with coaches. Only approach those who seem receptive, but it's a great opportunity for students to get experiential learning, in something they're studying and something they care about, and add value to the teams in the athletic work.
What's your position at Notre Dame?
So I run a master's program in business analytics and do some teaching, which includes sports analytics courses at the undergrad and master's levels. And then the advisor to the Sports Analytics Club, which I think takes way more time than my 20% allocation when I work with, but that's okay, it's fun.
He's having a lot of fun. One tip I got yesterday from JP, the wrestling commissioner here, he said start with women's sports, because they typically haven't gotten as much love and attention, and they might welcome it. So go for that, or minor sports, right? Now, you don't have to do projects for football and basketball. Start with a team that might be proficient, but could be even better. Pick lacrosse or something, get going there. So it's very interesting when you go to these places. I talked last year at Stanford, and those kids are kind of in a different category. The chit-chat before my talk started was, should I take the Vikings offer or should I go with the Yankees? So these kids are like in a totally different world. I've been at the Purdue group. In case you're wondering, the student who founded 3 years ago the Purdue Sports Analytics Group is Kristen Morey. She's standing there. She's a stats major. And she was the tutor for the basketball team. So if you follow Purdue, you will see Isaac Haas, who graduated, and Matt Harms, who is still there. When she finished, she applied for an intern job at the Houston Astros. And they do a video interview as step one. She was competing, she didn't know, with 500 other kids for the intern job. But the happy ending of the story is that they called her up and said, we'd like to offer you a job. And she asked about it, and they said, no, you don't understand. We're offering you a job, not an internship. So she is now a data analyst for the Houston Astros. Okay, tip 5. You should do the short-term projects, but it's always good, and I think you know that from the previous talks, to have a long-term vision. So if I were your unpaid consultant helping you, I would say take lots of tips from industry. So in the customer area, what you want to have is the 360-degree view of the customer where all the data is in one place. Other speakers have talked about that. Certainly as a Teradata person with data warehousing background, I would advocate that. But you just translate it into the 360-degree view of the fan. And then you need to couple that with gathering data about the entire life cycle. So you should start with children. Do you do householding? Do you know which kids are in which families that then turn into students, which turn into ticket holders while they're students and afterwards? Then they get married and have kids, and maybe your donor database needs to be spliced in so that you can get the complete view. And then they're a donor, and the kids, of course, go back and you recycle this picture, but you have a pretty good feel for all the activities. Then, of course, they die, and the farm should be donated to Purdue University, right? That's kind of the picture at Purdue. Now, complementing this, and I haven't seen it, but you can educate me because you're the experts. Does anyone have what you would think of as a 360-degree view of the athlete? So that you're tracking the athlete through the entire lifetime, starting with maybe kids that come to a camp at your campus. They become a proficient athlete. You recruit them. They're a student athlete. You collect all the IPP data on progress, health, safety, sleep patterns, nutrition. All that stuff goes into one database. Then they graduate. Maybe you help them with post-graduation success. And then ultimately, maybe they have family and kids, and you can see the whole cycles interconnect. Is anybody doing 360-degree view of the fan or of the athlete? What I'm seeing when I talk to athletic departments are the athletic directors are often putting up barriers to vendors coming in because they're all going to solve world hunger, right? And they're all going to sell you one thing that doesn't integrate with everything else. And so you have sleep data over here and injury data over here and practice data over here, and it's not integrated. You can't get the big view of what's going on. Tip 6, be patient. Those of you that heard me ask that predictive modeling question, there was a reason for that. It was kind of a setup for this picture. Nobody goes from not knowing much of anything to being world expert in 1 year. You have to learn over a period of time. And this is typical for Teradata customers. Often we would ask people, where are you on the curve? So just to explain it, in the beginning when God created data warehouses, what are they used for? Reporting. And when I look at IPP, that's what I see. You're in the reporting stage. After that, you can drill into the data, and maybe you can connect the dots to see why did we have this anomaly? Why are we off the mark? You can go back in time and see what was happening before. What you really want to do is add predictive models looking ahead so that you can see what's going to be happening and what are the range of options that we have. And more to the point, like the regression models, what are the levers that I can push to make the desired outcome happen? You have to do the factor analysis. Now, if you ever get to that point, and I would say most proficient Teradata customers are pretty much at 3 going to 4. And 4 is operationalizing the data. So that has to do with, if you think of the database as a model of reality, how up to date is it? So I asked Troy, like the IPP updates that you provide, they come in like 4 weeks after the fact or something. Quite different from Walmart, where every scan in every store makes it up via satellite and into their database in under 10 minutes. Okay? So you may have areas that are time critical, like students skipping classes and stuff. You probably don't want to wait 2 weeks before you load that data in order to get the view of the student athlete. So you may need to make it operational. And then activating just means squeeze the human decision makers and the people looking at the reports out of the loop, because you can write rules. If you didn't go to class, you're going to get an email. Human doesn't have to be involved. Right? Come see a human and explain yourself. Right? Okay, so you can learn. This is the last slide, the finale. So if you've been intrigued by this, if you think that you could do a Moneyball day on campus, it's become a bit of a formula at the schools I've done it at. Coaches are mostly morning people, so I usually scare them at 8 o'clock in the morning with the things that are happening around the world. I was in Germany, so I'm fairly smart on soccer these days. And my whole goal is to crack open the door to the idea of maybe doing collaborative projects on your own campus with your own students. You don't need to give me the data. I'll just help. Then I have to find faculty that are willing to sponsor some of these projects. Now, the more high-powered the institution, the more likely I'm going to get the question of, is the research publishable? Right? Because that's what's important to them. But I think there are plenty of areas where, by analogy, you can take something that they might be working on and then apply it to a sports problem. So, for example, Scott's area is really operations research, and they have machine failure models and Weibull predictive models for when a machine's going to break down, or if you put it back into service, how much longer will it go before it crashes and burns, and what's its end of lifetime. Is that similar to like pro sports lifetime and when you should trade people or when you should be playing athletes? I think so. I haven't seen a research project like that, but if you're smart in operations research and you get linked up with health and safety people, I think we could do that project pretty easily. Make sense? The other problem with faculty, honestly, is a lot of them are Indian and Chinese, and they don't know the rules of American football or baseball. So having subject matter expertise can help. I did get the question by an Indian guy of when am I going to do cricket analytics, and I'm proud to announce we have started working on cricket analytics with people in London. I have not yet gotten to the Chinese lady's question about ping pong. I think the sensors have to get really tiny to do that, or video technology could be used. My student talks on campus usually are in the afternoon. Those are always, always well attended. This one's from Bryant University, where we totally filled up the auditorium. So there's no lack of interest on campus of kids who want to do these projects, but to orchestrate it, you need to work with the faculty and then the athletic departments. So hopefully you got the key idea, which is let's treat the athletic department like a big data lab. It's just filled with interesting projects that could be done. I'm going to skip these. I'm going to give you the slides, though, but I wanted a couple of seconds for questions. Questions? I do have cards. If anybody wants a card, my email is at the bottom there. Yeah, I was talking to you over a beer last night, and the donor integration just between sports and the rest of the university is one step in that direction, but I don't know anybody doing either one. And if that were the case in industry, people would get fired. Right? You don't have an integrated view of your customers. So it shows how far behind the sports area is, and maybe the value that we can bring from people that worked in industry and know that. Yeah.
Hi, Nikki Moore. Scott, I was curious about how you manage coach resistance to getting data on their teams, particularly given in sort of handing it off to students.
Sure. So, I mean, if I go ask the students which teams do you want to work for, they're going to tell me men's basketball, football, and we do have some working for football, but not currently men's basketball. And what I tell them is, well, let's work with the coaches who, one, have expressed interest in working with, the club and doing some analytics projects. Say after Dave came to our campus and visited and got the two of us groups together. My thought is that we'll take the long-term indirect approach, and that those coaches sit in the same meetings, with the rest of the AD staff. And if we're showing value to teams who are interested, eventually word will get around, and we will eventually get to work with those teams. Now, even with those we're working with, there is some resistance for some type of data. Most of my students are student volunteers through the club. A few of them are university employees, which gets the lawyers a little less on our backs about having access to certain types of perhaps protected data. So there are some ways to work through that, but it's mainly with the coaches and administrators that are interested in working with us, focus on them and show value, and the good word will get out is kind of the approach I take. That and put people who want to do analytics for certain teams on those teams as managers, let them get known by the coaching staff, and then kind of come out of the closet and say, oh, by the way, I'd really like to do some analytics work here too.
Yeah. Okay.
I would thought it was interesting you had different schools, students working with a different school. Did you find that the bigger schools that you were doing that for, providing the service for, that they were more accepting of a different school to give their data to work on projects?
Well, it was only that one case.
Yeah.
I forgot to tell you, Scott named, Moore's Law and computer transistor density. Maybe this audience not so much. So Scott called me one day and goes, I'm calling it Schrader's Law after you. And it's like, what's that? He said, you've often made the comment, the more high-powered the institution in athletics, the less likely they're going to let you in and tell you anything. Which is why I love those smaller schools, because they're more eager. I've often thought of a marketing campaign where I'd pick the bottom 2 or 3 in each conference and then contact them. And it looks like you need help, I don't know. I used to do marketing too, so. Okay, well, it's been delightful meeting all of you. I hope you got something out of the presentation. Like I said, you can have a copy of it. It's totally free. My time is free, so go for it.